Daryl, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Luke. I appreciate you bringing me on.
What does it mean to get your head out of your ass?
You know, uh, well, I think so one of the prerequisites, and I've never been asked this question, so I love it. But one of the prerequisites is to have your head in your ass first, which I managed to do at a fairly young age, and so getting my head out of my ass for me now has to do with how I'm treating myself, how I'm treating the world, how I'm treating others in body, mind, heart, and soul, and how I'm going about the business of living. I'm a true believer that we know it when we get our head out of our ass, and we also know it when our head's in our ass.
Body, mind, heart, and soul. Can you elaborate on that? So I'm kind of trying to build my own framework of what a good life is, and what I've come up with so far is health, wealth, relationships, and spirituality. So can you kind of expand on what was it? Sorry.
Sure, body, mind, heart, and soul. I mean, that's the
Yep.
basis of what I try to accomplish. I say on a daily basis, but it's about the habits that I develop um, around my life and to support my life. And so my body, if I put garbage in my body, if I put, a whole bunch of processed stuff in my body, I eat late at night, I gain weight, I don't exercise, if I do all of those things, I'm going to get the rewards that those offer me, which is probably ill health and probably not feeling good and lack of energy and all those sorts of things. And if I treat my body well, then I get the benefits of that. I get to have energy. I get to have, feeling good. I get to wake up in the morning, not feeling lethargic, all of those kinds of things. And for me, I'm almost 60 years old. I'm not on any prescription drugs, no medications, no heart stuff, no blood pressure stuff, nothing like that. And that's as a result of taking care of my body. Taking care of my mind is and it's become, I think, equally, if not more important, because there's so many things that come at our minds, with social media, and we can stay on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if we decide to. We can stay plugged into social media. We can stay plugged into noise and TV and podcasts and all that kind of stuff. Nothing against podcasts. I rather enjoy them myself. But, we have to unplug, and we have to train our minds. And what I try to do is train my mind to be strong, and train my mind to be able to say no, and train my mind to be able to say, you know what? Even though I don't feel like it, I'm going to go do this, whether it's work out or whether it's, not eat that junk, or whether it's go toward, a healthier lifestyle, that sort of thing. So this is sort of broad brush, but in terms of my heart, I need to be good to myself. I need to do things that resonate here. I need to do things that resonate with my relationships. I can't sacrifice my relationships for anything, really. I have to be honest. I have to be honest with me. I have to be honest with the people around me. And those are the things to me that take care of right here. If I'm not taking care of right here, I feel restricted. I feel like I can't breathe as well. I feel like I'm at risk. Those are the things that happen if I'm not taking care of my heart. And taking care of my soul is, for me, it's probably the launching pad for all of the other ones. And the other ones interact. Body, mind, heart, and soul all interact. I can affect one, and they'll affect the others. I can affect one in a positive way, and it affects the others. I can affect one in a negative way, and it affects the others. But soul, to me, is me connecting with a power greater than myself. And it doesn't have to be, we don't have to call it God, we don't have to call it anything. The longer I'm on this journey, the less definition I have to apply to things in my life, including God. I call God God because it's just easier, and rather than some other name like Bob or Steve, God seems to fit pretty well. So I find quiet, and I plug into that power, and for me it's doing breath work, and it's doing meditation, and I generally do it 6 days a week because I'm a rebel. If somebody tells me I have to do something 7 days a week, I'm not going to do it. I'll find a way not to. So anyway, that's body, mind, heart, and soul to me, and that just rounds out my life. And I've thrown my financial picture into that mix in terms of things that need to be handled, as you mentioned, and that is as a result of how I treat the rest of me.
Yeah, so there's a lot there, and I want to dive into kind of all aspects of what you just went through. I wanted to talk a bit about intentionality. For me, intentionality is kind of just really trying to nail down what you want and moving towards it. And so many people just tend not to do that and seemingly get dragged by life. Like you mentioned health. I recently went snowboarding with my kids. And I like mountain biking with my kids. It's a really meaningful experience for me. And I guess when thinking about intentionality, I mean, that's something I want to be able to do for the next 15, 20, 30 years, right? So to be intentional, I will reverse engineer what do I need to be doing now to make that happen. And the reality is I need to be having a fairly diligent training routine, like training every day, doing weights, doing cardio, stuff like that. Otherwise, when I get to that age, when we're older, there's just no way I'm going to be able to live that life that I want. I mean, how do you think about intentionality?
To me, what that conjures up, and it may be a little bit different from a definition perspective, but intentionality to me is being in this moment with what I'm doing at this particular time. And I had a thing the other day where I misplaced the keys to my truck because my mind was here, my mind was off somewhere, and I was doing things, but my mind wasn't with what I was doing. So, I left my keys. I was cleaning out one office and putting things into a different office, and my keys got, mixed up but it was because I wasn't paying attention to where I put them. And so intentionality to me can be that meaning, but it can also mean how I'm consciously, and I think this is what you're referring to, Luke, how I'm consciously moving myself forward and my actions and my behaviors forward toward what I feel like my intentions are. And I don't use goals anymore. I stopped using goals when I was probably, 25 or 30 years old because I found out that intentions are, for me, goals, but they include faith. They include knowing where I'm going, not just wanting to be there, but knowing where I'm going. And so I hope that helps explain how I think about intentions and intentionality. Because it's very, very powerful, and it's not necessarily the vernacular that I use, but knowing that I'm going either to where I intend to go, and many times I've found out that where I intend to go is not as cool as where I actually end up through the whole process.
Yeah, I've got a weird relationship with goals. I found that a lot of my goals were like, I'll be happy when. And I was just on this like cycle of never feeling like, I had arrived, like never feeling like it was good enough, I guess. I want to talk about let's take this to like a practical level, right? So let's say someone who's listening now, they're unhappy with their life. They're unhappy with their job, maybe drinking a bit too much, not happy with their relationships, arguing a lot, stuff like that. I mean, what's the first step that they can take to change their life? How do you think about that?
I think about that in terms of it starts with honesty with ourselves. It starts with taking a look at what's actually happening in our lives as our lives play out, as opposed to, getting caught up in that wishing world, or that, oh, it'll be better, like you just mentioned, Luke, it'll be better when world. I have to take stock of my life, and I have to take stock of my relationships, and I have to take stock of what's happening inside of me to determine, whether I want to keep going in that direction or whether I want to go in a different direction. So self-honesty, I think, is absolutely crucial. And along with self-honesty, I think, there's power in being sick and tired of being sick and tired. And there's power in getting to the point where I'm willing to make changes. And for some folks, it's worse than they are now. It has to get worse than it is currently for people to make that change. But there's a lot of things in life that can be affected by how we're living, and sometimes just taking stock of what that is can turn the whole thing around once we're willing to do things differently.
Yeah, I often think about that with like people with alcohol, right? Like, it has to reach a certain level of bad or unacceptable for them to actually change. And that's why I think people with worse drinking habits tend to get better quicker in their life, if that makes sense. And people who kind of, there's a lot of people stuck in that, like, have a few, like 3 or 4 drinks every night, drink a bit too much on the weekend, but it's not destructive enough to actually, for them to want to make their change, right? So they're stuck in this constant cycle of like just being a little bit unhappy and feeling mediocre, but not being bad enough to change. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Does that resonate?
100%. Yeah. Makes complete sense. And I think a lot of people, I would say, a larger majority of people are stuck in that place than are, actually get to the point where they're willing to make those changes. And the difficult thing, and I was young when I got straight and sober, so it was I had to figure out, I had to look at my life and look at it as honestly as I could at that point in time, which was, Lord knows what kind of honesty I was capable of. But am I willing to do some of this hard stuff that they're asking me to do to change my life? And I had gotten to a point where I was willing to do that. But there are a lot of people that aren't. And, one of the things they talk about is maybe they aren't yet. It could be coming.
I find, I don't know, alcohol is a funny one because I don't know whether it's like this with all aspects of your life, but I there's a couple of different parts going on. Like I feel like I'm almost 14 months sober, and I find that I was tricking myself a lot, right? Like I'm fairly good at figuring out whether a behavior is good or bad and cutting it out if it doesn't serve me. But for drinking and drugs as well was a very weird one for me because I would trick myself, right? Like the pros of drinking, there was like 3 of them and the cons list was huge. But, I'd convinced myself that I can't give up drinking because of these 3 little things. And then once I got to the point where I was actually fed up with living like that and quit, I look back and go, you were just lying to yourself, So you talk about trying to be honest with yourself. Do you have a specific like framework? I mean, I'm lucky enough that I've got a coach and I do this systematically on a monthly basis, and then I do a full quarterly offsite. A lot of that involves kind of my values, who I am and what I want out of life, and then reverse engineering my habits to build that? Do you have like a framework you think about for this? Should like, because a lot of people, they just go through their day, right? They get up early, they go to work, they come home, they get dragged in front of the TV, and they think they don't have any time to do this kind of work. So, yeah, do you have a framework? I mean, how does somebody practically implement that advice?
What I started out with, and I would recommend this to anybody with any sort of an issue that they're trying to surmount, and it doesn't have to be drugs or alcohol. It can be food, it can be social media, it can be gambling, it can be sex, it can be anything that's sort of knocking us off of our center and potentially creating consequence in our lives in not a good way. But I was introduced to the 12 steps when I first got involved in sobriety, and you know, I went through a drug and alcohol treatment program, and they introduced me to the 12 steps. And I use that as my framework because I don't have to figure it out with the 12 steps. You know, it starts with honesty with myself, and then it goes to, you know, hey, maybe there's something here that can help me. Maybe I need to allow my life to happen as opposed to just taking the bull by the horns and constantly, you know, kicking the crap out of myself. You know, there is a framework in the 12 steps, and that's what worked for me for probably the first 9 or 10 years of being, you know, straight and sober. And then it just became a lifestyle for me. It became something that I would investigate and explore and read about and think about, and Eastern philosophies and, you know, all kinds of different things that sort of fed my my understanding, or at least my ability to see that there's this giant life out there, but there's also this giant life in here. And I'm not going to stay, for me, and this is what I believe, I'm not going to stay on the right track if I'm trying to just straighten out everything out here. I've got to straighten out this first, and then the outside gets much, much straighter. So 12 steps was my framework, but there's a lot of things that can be utilized these days.
Can you tell us a bit more about your own story with addiction in the past?
Sure. You know, I think it's fairly, well, I'll start a little earlier and I'll keep it short, but I grew up in a Midwestern U.S. household, which basically means auto industry. You know, my dad was a mechanic. Everybody's dad seemed like he was either a mechanic or worked for one of the big three, or was a farmer, that sort of thing. So my dad was pretty tough. He was a Korean War veteran, and just, you know, he was a nice enough guy, but he was pretty tough, and my mom was pretty tough too. So I grew up in a, you know, shoulders back, chest out, feet together, sort of yes ma'am, no ma'am, you know, all that sort of stuff. And it wasn't quite that stringent, but it could be that stringent many a time. And so that was the framework that I started with. A lot expected of us, and you know, we didn't have much money or anything like that. So we got what we got, and we got a lot of no's, and you know, we didn't know whether or not we had money when we were young. It was just, this was the house we grew up in. So, and that was completely fine. But that's kind of the backdrop. When I was 13, I took my first drink, and it was, at that point, seemed like the best day of my life, because all I wanted to do was do it again. All I wanted to do was do it more. And that's what I did from that time until basically when I was 19 years old. It was a lot of drinking, it was a lot of drugs, it was a lot of trouble, it was lying, cheating, and stealing, and it was really losing my soul. One of the real sort of hard things for me and difficult things for me to deal with was I always wanted people to be proud of me, and I think it's just the way I grew up. I wanted, my mom and dad to be proud of me. I wanted coaches and teachers and everything. But on the other hand, I was a big troublemaker, and I was, again, a liar, a cheat, and a thief. And so I had this rub inside of me. I had this rub internally, and that was one of the really difficult things for me because as I mentioned, I was losing my soul, and I really was, because I was living a life that I knew was wrong and was a lie, but I couldn't get away from it. And I was confronted, basically an intervention when I was 18 at the time, and I was left with the go talk to this drug and alcohol counselor, or get out of our life. And so it was 18 years old. I was scared to death. I thought I was, tough guy, but I wasn't. I was scared to death. And I didn't want to lose my family. I didn't want to, be excommunicated, I suppose, from the people that I knew cared about me. So I went to go see the drug counselor, and he recommended that I go into drug and alcohol treatment. A couple days before I went into drug and alcohol treatment, I was at a New Year's Eve party, and I was around, 100, 200 people. I don't know the size of it, but it was a lot of people, and I was pretty wasted, and I was the most lonely and the most just in pain that I'd ever been in my entire life. And I thought, you know what? I don't know if I want to be on this planet anymore. And I ended up I don't know what happened the rest of that night, but I ended up going into drug and alcohol treatment 3 days later, January 3rd. And I decided, I think the point where I decided I wanted something different, and I'm not certain, I can't look back, and I don't really remember other than that story. But I think that was the point where I was like, you know what? I'm either going to change or I'm going to die. I'm going to be gone. And if I'm not dead outwardly, I'll be completely dead inwardly. And so I made a decision at that point to change.
That, I got goosebumps. Like, that losing my soul, like, fuck, that resonates with me so much. And I feel like for me, it happened over a longer period. I think a lot of my drinking stemmed from not feeling good enough, right? Like, so like that's been, I don't know, I guess my core belief, and it's actually led to a lot of external success, right? Like, I've pushed myself in business like ridiculously. Like, there was a period of my life where I was working like 24/7, right? And that led to panic attacks and all of that kind of stuff. But anyway, like, yeah, losing my soul, I don't know why, that really, really just gave me goosebumps, because I can resonate, and I feel like that happened with me over a longer period. But like, again, I mean, this is, I got to a point where I was like this will destroy my life. This is gonna, like, I actually have this is a fork in the road, right? Like, I'm gonna potentially fuck up my marriage, my relationship with my family, all of that kind of stuff, or I'm gonna quit alcohol. So, like, and if I don't quit alcohol, again, I feel like I'm losing my soul. But again, like, you and I, we both seem like an extreme case of that. Like, it was a very clear, like, if this doesn't happen, you're going to fuck up your life. What is your opinion on people? Like, let's go back to that person who's just drinking too much. They're not going to destroy their life, but they're definitely not living their optimum life. Can that person, do you believe that person can make a change? Or is it just never going to be bad enough? Like, are they all? And there's a quote that I always bang on about on this podcast, and people are probably sick of it, right? But there's a clip out there of Steve-O from Jackass, and he's talking about the worst thing in the world. I don't know if you've seen this, but the worst thing in the world would have alcoholism that is just bad enough that you are not living out your hopes and dreams, but not bad enough that it's going to completely fuck up your life. Like, do you think people that are on that cusp can change?
I do think they can change, but I think it's probably fairly rare, and I also think that over time, nobody's ever static, right? We're either moving in one direction or the other. We're either getting worse or we're getting better. I truly believe that, and I believe that about my life. So that's why I push myself, like you push yourself and have pushed yourself. And so there's a very real possibility that the person who's having some consequence now, and maybe that's just an apathetic, shitty life that they don't like. It could be significantly worse 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now. And because they're not going to get better if they keep doing the same things. So they're only going to get worse. And so it's all timing. I really believe that. It's timing for people, and it's what have I destroyed in my life that is going to spur me to be honest with myself and decide to become willing enough to make change, and that's really what it boils down to. So that could be a lot of things. That could be I was drunk and I ran over the dog, or I lost my relationship, or whatever it is. Some of those things are going to continue to happen. And because if we're on this road, that's where it goes. That's where it leads. The
other one is like not being honest with yourself about the opportunity cost, right? What's the other side of the coin? The life you're not living because you're living in this, I don't know, mediocre cycle of like a touch of alcoholism, and it's just like, this is easy in hindsight for me because I've lived on both edges of that coin, right? And life is, and I can honestly say that life is so much better on the other side. But I just couldn't, and I swear I knew it at the time, but I just couldn't make that change.
I didn't know at the time. Maybe that had to do with my youth when I got sober, because I had no idea what I thought life for me was going to be, following in my dad's footsteps, maybe working on. I started off when I was a kid. My dad put me in front of this farmer at 14 years old at church, and he said, "Can you put him to work?" And the farmer's like, "Yeah, I can put him to work," and he put me to work and busted my ass, for a lot of hours every day, and I'm a young kid, so that was kind of what I thought. My dad said to me one time, even after I got out of treatment, he's like, I can get you a job on the assembly line. And I'm like, no, I think I'm good. I'm gonna pursue other things. But that, I guess the point is I didn't know that there was something bigger or better until I got out of treatment and I started to see people who were like living in a way that I'm like, damn, I'd love to be that calm or that peaceful or that, looking people in the eye, having your shit together, having your head out of your ass, all those things that I didn't have. And I saw people like that. I was like, really? How are you guys doing that? So that made me listen, that made me want to do what they were doing. And there was nothing wrong with the way I grew up, but my dad was in a slot of, at that time it was you work 40 years and at the same company and you get a pension and you go home and, and they give you a clock or something. That was it. And I didn't know there was something different, but now I do.
How did you find those people? Because I feel like a lot of people have a lack of exposure to those kind of people, right? Like it's like, and I can definitely resonate with this. I'm from a blue collar family, and it's like, you actually, and also like if you're stuck in your circle of friends and those circle of friends are all behaving in the same way as you're not necessarily exposed to the kinds of people you're speaking about, right? So I mean, I guess it comes down to trying to figure out how to change your environment.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I if I'm, one of the things they told me when I got sober was if you change the game, you got to change the players. And I had to switch out my team. I had to find a new team. And I don't know what it was, if it was divine providence or whatever the heck it was, but I started to meet people who would do things like mastermind groups, and reading about and listening to spiritual type things, or financial, becoming financially successful, this and that, and all that sort of stuff. And I had no idea. I ended up going to college, and after I got sober, and I was the first person who graduated from college in my family, and I didn't know the difference between wholesale and retail when I got out of college. I got a criminal justice degree because I was scared to get like a finance or marketing or business because I didn't understand it. And, it kind of freaked me out. But for some reason I was attracted to those people who were showing success, and not just outwardly, but also inwardly. You could see it in their eyes that they had something.
I think you need to create that, I guess you could call it a vacuum within your life, right? Like, if your life is just full of what you're currently doing with your current friends and your current drinking habits and stuff like that, you need to somehow, I guess, create a vacuum in your life to be able to meet those people. Well, I did want to ask you about mentorship, right? You've spoken about mentorship. Now, I think a lot of people get very confused, like they don't understand it. Does it always need to be a formal agreement, or how do you see mentorship?
I think mentorship, the way it worked for me was, and this for me had to do with the 12 steps, but I've had many mentors since. And in the 12 steps, they're called sponsors. So, and it's of a person's own free will, willing to help. And one of the things that my sponsor told me, and there's a whole bunch of stuff, but he was a very wise man, and I grew up fighting with life and fighting with problems, and you're not hurt if you're not bleeding out, like that sort of thing. No pain, no gain, all that great stuff that tears you up after a period of time. And it tore me up after a period of time, but I was probably 9 months sober, and I went to this mentor, Bud was his name, and I said, Bud, I'm this is going on, I got this problem, I got this issue, da da da. And he said, Daryl, when you stop fighting, the fighting stops. And I was like, oh. I didn't understand it then. I didn't understand what he was saying, but we're so conditioned to fight with life, and fight with ourselves, and fight getting better, and fight doing good things for ourselves, and thinking of reasons not to, and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, that was my initial sponsor mentor relationship, and I've had other mentors. And there's one thing I will say about mentors, because people who are, in my opinion, worthy of being your mentor or my mentor are going to want to help. They're going to want to help me be better at my life. And those are the people that I've met. But I also need to take responsibility for finding my mentors. I need to take responsibility for exploring and getting off my ass and doing what it takes to find the information or whatever it is that I'm looking for, and the mentor that aligns with that. I've had great business mentors. I've had, breath coaches. I've had meditation mentors, all that sort of thing. But I had to seek them out, and I had to ask them questions, and that's my responsibility. So I don't think that there's, anybody who's worth their salt from a mentorship perspective will be happy to provide that knowledge that they've achieved.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm thinking back to a few, I guess, pivotal moments. I mean, I'm in a really good place right now, and I wasn't 5 years ago. And there's just been a few pivotal moments where I've, I guess, met people in my life, and I really like resonated with what you were saying before. Like you could feel that they're living happy. You could feel that they're confident. You could feel that, I don't know, that they're living the type of life that you want to live, right? And from then, it's just a matter of how do I get more of these people in my life? I mean, you spoke before about fighting with life. Can I just double click on that? What did you mean by that?
Well, there's a lot of things, and one of the things my one mentor told me was the road gets narrower. So it's life can be difficult, and I think that's such an important thing to understand. And they tried to explain that to me when I first got sober, like, Daryl, you don't need to be surprised when difficult things happen. You don't need to be flipped out every time something doesn't go your way. That's called life. That's called life. And I can either fight against that and just, I'm going to carry this positive attitude and everything's going to be great and everything's going to be wonderful and nothing bad's going to happen. And that's the rub. That's the fight, because I've got this battle going on inside of me where I'm expecting life to be this, and life is actually this. And it's completely okay that life is difficult. It's completely okay that I have roadblocks in front of me. It's completely okay that I have hurdles. It's completely okay that I've been broke in my life. Many times I've been, had to deal with a lot of death in my life of friends and family and that sort of thing. And excuse me, lots of injuries and surgeries and all that sort of stuff. But I can promise it doesn't dampen my spirit. It doesn't knock me off of my game like it used to. And because I'm either flowing with life and allowing life to happen the way life is going to happen, whether I'm bucking and kicking and screaming or not, I can either get in the flow of life or I can fight against the tide and try to swim against the current. And I think that's sort of that's a pretty broad stroke in terms of answering that question. But there are things that get much finer in terms of the detail. But that's really it. Am I fighting life, or am I allowing life? And allowing life is powerful.
Yeah, sounds like you're talking about acceptance. I mean, can we so you spoke earlier briefly or widely about getting your mind right. Can we dive into that a bit deeper? What are some practical tips or habits? How do we get our mind right?
There's a part in one of my books I talk about the ass kicking machine, which is everything. I get sober and I start doing things that I'm like, oh, that's wrong, or I shouldn't be thinking that, or I shouldn't be feeling that, or and just kicking the crap out of myself because I'm not living up to my expectations of what I think I should be at any given point in my life. And I think that's where we have to strengthen ourselves. And I look at, I think mental toughness is a very important aspect of life. And mental toughness to me means I have to be in a position and find myself in a position where I can say no to the things that don't resonate in here for me, and yes to the things that do resonate. And sometimes I have to say no to things that I really want to do, but I know that it's probably not the right thing because the right thing is over here somewhere. And I can feel all that stuff right in here, and it's crucial to be able to listen to those messages and listen to what life is trying to tell me. I truly believe, and for a long time, I put in the work, I do what I need to do, I do all of my practices, I exercise, I eat right, I breathe and I meditate and all those sorts of things. But that's part of conditioning myself to head toward the things that are crucial for me to, in the way I look at success nowadays, is waking up in the morning with a smile on my face. And so sometimes saying no to those things that can take me off of that track, one of the things that I've had to do is learn to quiet my mind. And it's probably the most difficult thing to do, but also probably the most effective, right? Like we talk about risk, a bigger risk, potentially bigger reward. Meditation and quieting your mind is the same way. It takes practice, it takes persistence, it takes, sticking with it, whether or not you think you're doing it right, until something happens and you're like, wow, my mind isn't full of all that furniture in the attic getting kicked around all the time. There aren't people living in my head rent-free anymore. I'm not stuck on, this idea or this fear or this whatever it is. And that's when your mind is allowed to quiet and soften and make room for things other than just that noise. And I believe from that place, that's where you're mentally tough, and that's where you're in a position where you can be led. At least that's how it's worked for me.
So you brushed over practices or habits. I mean, one of them sounds like meditation. Can you expand a bit on, I guess, what practices or daily habits you do?
Sure. The first thing is quieting my mind, and how I achieve that is quieting my body, which has to do with breathwork. And a great friend of mine has a wonderful website that talks about this breath work, but he taught this to my wife and I several years ago. And if I'm breathing properly, I am able to calm my body and I'm able to calm my mind to set me up for a meditation practice. And the meditation practice that I do is called primordial sound meditation. It sounds crazy. It's really not. It's very simple. It is a mantra that I repeat. And as I'm repeating this mantra, I'm also just paying attention to my breath. And sometimes that's paying attention to my body, just sort of expanding and contracting as I breathe. Sometimes it's my belly expanding and contracting as I breathe. Sometimes I pay attention to right here in the middle of my forehead as I'm breathing. And it just, all it really does and all it's designed to do is just bring the level of calm, bring that noise level down. And it really is that simple. So breath work, meditation, exercise, those are really the foundations. And then after my meditation practice, I practice gratitude, and I say thanks for everything that I have, from my wife to my parents who are both deceased, my brother and sister, all the people in my life. I am thankful for just living, just being able to show up on this planet and be able to grow and change and help other people. And so between those things, meditation, breath work, gratitude, and exercise, and you can throw eating correctly in there. It works. It really works. My life is so much better than I ever could have imagined it could be.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've got what I would consider my fundamental daily habits, and exercise, I think everybody's got that one or should have that one. Meditate, same thing. It's kind of just a mindfulness practice. The other one's read, and it just helps me keep my head straight. The other one I do is family connections, right? Like I try to connect with every single family member every single day, and that's been a big game changer. I wanted to,
cool.
I wanted to ask you about vulnerability. So I think vulnerability for me has been a huge game changer in my life, and I think it's a big struggle, maybe just from the culture that I come from, but a lot of men really struggle with it. And I'm thankful, like I'm part of an organization, it's actually started in America, not sure if you're aware, called Entrepreneurs Organization. And we meet once a month, and we basically have a meeting and get as vulnerable as possible about more different aspects of our life. And I feel like that alone has led to the biggest breakthroughs because it's forced me to be honest with myself. I think like getting in a room and intentionally being as vulnerable as possible led me to actually be honest about my drinking, because there was no other, I guess, place where I could verbalize how I truly felt. I think with a lot of friendship groups, and again, I don't know whether this is just men, we never break the surface level conversations, and I don't know whether it's because we don't want to burden other people with our issues, or whether we're just taught that. I mean, how do you think about vulnerability, and what do you think its powers are?
I think the softer I become on the inside, which has to do with vulnerability for me, the better my life is. It truly is, and that was a difficult one for me. My name actually in Irish, I didn't know this till probably a year ago, means oak tree, and I'm 6'6", I'm like 215, 220. I'm not a small dude. I'm just like an oak tree. But the problem with an oak tree is it can break, when the wind's blowing real hard. And as opposed to a reed, which is what I've been trying to do for, 40 years, trying to be more like a reed so I can bend with the wind as opposed to break. And to me, that's vulnerability. And I haven't wanted to be an oak tree for a long time, but I've had that sort of stiffness and that unflinching sort of character, and it's gone away over the course of time. And a lot of that has had to do with being vulnerable, and experiencing the things that I don't want to experience, and crying and letting grief out and letting difficult things out and allowing myself to feel. And things like allowing myself to be loved and allowing myself to be taken care of by my wife or my family, or, I've always been the guy who's taken care of everybody else. And, for the last several years, I've allowed people to give their love to me and to share themselves with me. And that's me opening up to allowing that has been an absolutely beautiful transformation for me. And it's ongoing. I'm going to this, coincidentally, in about 3 weeks, I'm going to this, a buddy of mine, he's a psychologist, but he does this deep waters recovery. And I guess they just break you down, from a vulnerability perspective. And then, it's kind of like the hero's journey. You do the descent, and then you start to move back up. But I'm about to get my ass handed to me in about 3 weeks from a vulnerability perspective. And the hardest thing for me is to just, and I'm over it now, but when I was first thinking about it, I'm like, well, I'm not going to let these guys, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, dude. That's what you have to do if you're going to be vulnerable. So you just, go in with an open mind and open heart and see what happens.
What do you mean by softer on the inside? You mean less walls or less embattled?
Less embattled, yeah. Less stiff, less tree-like, less, just allowing myself to soften. Because I can be a pretty hard dude, and I've been told this for a long time, and softening to me is, and that doesn't mean being a doormat. That doesn't mean letting somebody run over me. That doesn't mean, allowing myself to be taken advantage of, all that kind of stuff. Absolutely not. It means allowing myself to be loved, allowing myself to let other people in, allowing myself to be seen in terms of, it was hard for me to cry in front of my wife, when my
Still
dad
hard.
died or the dog died, like all that sort of stuff. And now, I can be watching America's Got Talent and somebody will do really, really well and I'll get a tear in my eye because I'm so happy for them. It's and it's completely cool because it's not what my dad would have done, but I have to change that in terms of me, and not that he was a bad guy. He was a wonderful human being, but he had that sort of tough veneer too, and that's not how I want to
What do you
carry
think that
myself
is?
in my life. What's that?
Like what do you think? What do you think's holding people back? What do you think that is? For me, I think it's a fear of appearing weak. Like you mentioned the crying in front of your wife. Like I on I guess a logical level, like I want to do more of that, right? But on an actual practical level, when it comes to it, I have this, and I think it's potentially cultural or it comes from my upbringing, but there's a fear of being weak if you show any signs of tears or anything like that. Do you think that's what's holding most men back?
I think it could be. Yeah, I think it could be. Fear of being weak or being perceived as weak. But also being taught that crying is weak. Being taught that showing that emotion is weak. And I have found that, see, I can delineate my life now in terms of how I respond to things. If somebody's going to get tough with me, I'm happy to get tough with them. If somebody's going to be tough in business, I'm happy to be tough. Fine, no problem. But if somebody's going to allow me to be vulnerable and they're going to be vulnerable with me, and it's a sharing that we can have, like, my relationship with my wife, then it's a strength as opposed to a weakness. And I think people get caught up in thinking that it's a weakness to show emotion, but it's not. It's a strength, because the man's strength is pretty easy for a man, I think. The sort of manly man stuff, all that, no problem. I can do that all day long. If I'm really strong, I can show emotion, and I can allow, and I'm not saying blubber in front of every person that walks down the sidewalk. But in those cases, like with my wife or whatever it is, to be able to exhibit that emotion, I think is very powerful and shows a strength that probably surprises a lot of people that think of it in that traditional term.
Yeah, I mean, I do think suppressing that, it's just going to end up showing up in other ways, and whether that's drinking, or whether that's anger, frustration, and stress, it's going to come out, right? So I think it's a lot more healthy getting it out that way than the other.
Right.
So, what's your philosophy on enough? Like, how do you keep growth from becoming another addiction?
I have a huge amount of interests, and I think that's like your podcast, Curious AF. I love that. I really do, because that's my life. I'm a curious dude, and I love to do stuff. So, it's not, if I do my habits, which I do, and consistency, I think, is one of the most difficult things to get our arms around, especially when we're younger. It was hard for me when I was younger to just be consistent and just do this stuff every day. If I do that, the possibility of me becoming addicted to this whole, growth thing is probably pretty minimal, because I'm just doing my habits and then they reverberate through the rest of my life. And so I can go about my business stuff. I can go about, whatever the things that I've done, rehabbing homes and being a landlord and owning properties and developing properties and, just all kinds of different things, different business interests and life interests that I have, vacationing and reading and traveling and I'm constantly doing stuff, writing books and et cetera, et cetera. So I think the key is to have a breadth of interests and a breadth of things that we do, for me, while keeping my, the things that keep me grounded and keep me, where I need to be intact. And then that reverberates through everything that I do. And it's the coolest thing to watch because, and I literally mean watch, because I can watch myself grow through all of the experiences that I have in my life without having to say, oh, I got to do this and I got to do that and I got to be this way and I got to be that way. You just become it over time, and that's a very cool thing. The opposite of an addiction.
Process sounds like process over outcome.
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, where I was kind of going with it was, I don't know. It goes back to this idea I think I spoke about earlier. It's like, I my whole life I had this like, I'll be happy when X, I'll be happy when Y, and a lot of them were financial goals. But I just found myself like meeting those goals and then moving straight on to the next goal. So I'm trying to rearrange my thinking to feel like I have arrived, right? Like I still have aspirations. I still have business growth aspirations. But yeah, I'm very careful about like getting sucked in. I guess that's another addiction of mine, right? Work. Getting sucked into like, to be good enough, I must reach X or I must reach Y. What's one belief or lesson you wish everyone could take away from your work?
So there's a story that I like to tell, and I think this is crucial. I used to go to the 12-step meetings. I haven't been to one in a long time, but we used to go to one in a nearby city, and it was in a community center, and it was probably, I don't know, a couple hundred people in this meeting. It was a big meeting. And it was me and a bunch of my boys. We were 19, 20 years old, just young punks. Some were serious about getting sober, some weren't. I wanted to get it together. And I go to this meeting and I'd see this guy, and he was fairly small in stature. He was a little older. He was a little hunched over, when he walked, and his name was Jimmy. And he had been sober for about 40 years at that time. And so us guys were 6 months, 9 months, a year sober, whatever. We look at Jimmy, we're like, oh man, this guy's a deity, he's something. And he didn't think that, but we all did. And anyway, so he was the only guy that would get up in those meetings, and he would fill the coffee carafe, and he would go fill people's coffee. And, if you've ever been around the 12 steps, there's this unspoken sort of hierarchy. Somebody that's been around for 40 years, somebody should be filling up their coffee. They shouldn't be filling up the other person's coffee. That's just kind of unspoken. But Jimmy did that, and it was selfless, and it was service, and it was just such a beautiful thing to watch because he didn't care about that stuff. He was just there to be a good human being and be of service to other people, and it was a beautiful thing to watch. And one of the things he used to say, and this is something that I've carried with me a long, long time. He used to say, if you want to have a life that you can be proud of and that you can feel good about, you have to learn how to stay small. And I got so much out of that because to me that speaks to humility. To me that speaks to another word for humility, which is being teachable. And the only way that I'm really going to change in this life, and I'm really going to be able to embrace this whole journey, is to understand that I don't know shit. I don't know what's going on. I just allow life to hand me the lessons, and I go find the lessons, and I explore, and I am on the journey. And that's the coolest place to be because when you're on the journey, and you spoke about this a couple minutes ago, Luke, when you're on the journey, there is no place to be. There is no place that's going to be the end. There is no place where it's going to feel better. It's just a place where you are now. And if you're on that journey, right now is the best place that you can be. And I know that sounds so mainstream to say, and I'm not a mainstream, buzzword bingo kind of guy, but that is really, really true. When you're on the journey, that is the destination when you're right there. So anyway, the lesson is stay small, stay humble, stay willing, stay able to learn. And that is what will take you as far as you want to go.
Yeah, I love it. I love the story about Jimmy, right? Like it's about, for me, it's about keeping my ego in check. I find most commonly when I stray from the cause, or I get lost and unhappy and frazzled in life, I can usually put it down to I've started being concerned about status or thinking about my own status again, right? Yeah.
There's a part in my second book about, and it's at the end, and sort of nirvana, and it's not necessarily that, the real definition of nirvana, but the best place that we can find ourselves to be is when we don't have to worry about ourselves anymore, and that's a really cool place to be, in terms of just like, what, I can just go do stuff. And there's a time in our lives, and I had to do it for a long time, I had to get myself together, and so that I could get to that place, and so that I could become a useful member of society, and become a useful member for myself. But
what do you mean don't have to worry about themselves? Like, don't have to freak out that you're going to do something stupid? Like, what does that mean, don't have to worry about yourself?
I don't have to think about, well, this is what I need, or I'm going to, if I just get this, everything will be great. Or, why are they thinking about themselves? They need to be thinking about what I need right now. Like that sort of stuff, kind of that self-serving thinking about, okay, if I get this, everything's going to be cool, everything's going to be great. And then you get it and you're like, oh shit, that didn't work, and then it's the next thing. So I think that's a crucial part of, and so many of these things happen as we stay on the journey. I cannot point back and say, oh, well, this happened because of this, or this happened because I read this book, or this happened because I meditated for 20 years. There's nothing that points to, like there's no direct correlation. It's just continues to change in a really cool way over time. And as long as I'm doing the work, I don't have to orchestrate or choreograph the results. I just have to do the work, and then the work takes care of the results.
Daryl, thanks so much.
Thanks, Luke.